Mr. Inbetween is an excellent show that until very recently I had never heard of before. One could say it's criminally underrated. Haha. No, but seriously, this show is really great and I have heard absolutely nothing about it until randomly finding it on Hulu. I mean, the subreddit only has 1.9k members and the trailer has 2.1 million views? Holy shit. But it only has 167 comments, so I'm not entirely sure what's going on there, but it is a real shame that this show gets really no traction, because it deserves it, and not many shows these days can really say that. Mr. Inbetween was created by Scott Ryan and also stars him. The story revolves around an Australian hitman named Ray Shoesmith. Ray is a father, brother, and sometimes a son to the father that he hates, and he attempts to juggle his life of crime with his everyday normal life. The character of Ray Shoesmith has been around for decades, and was first shown in the 2005 film The Magician, which was a low-budget indie movie. Later, though, in 2018, the show was able to premiere, and Scott Ryan reprised his role as the Magician, or Ray Shoesmith. The second season premiered in 2019, and the third and final season premiered in 2021. If the story of Ray Shoesmith sounds interesting to you from that short segment, then I ask that you go watch it right now. It's only 3 seasons, and as of this recording, it's over. Each episode is like 25 minutes, so it's really short, but if I haven't convinced you yet, keep watching. Now, I know there's many who will hear the premise of the show and roll their eyes. It's just another criminal show where it turns out the criminal actually has a heart of gold and only does it because of some bad luck on the road of life. Well, yes and no. Yes, and that Ray isn't just someone who does hits for fun, but that doesn't mean he has a heart of gold either. Really, he's a little more in between. He does, however, have some kind of morals. The line is often blurred when Ray acts out of anger, as he often does. In fact, I would say a majority of conflicts occur because of this issue, and he even goes as far as to join an anger management circle in order to help himself. Despite this, however, it doesn't really seem like he ever wants to really solve his problems, though I suppose it almost makes sense, because these anger issues probably help him with his ability to get things done with almost no problems, because in the end, Ray is an efficient worker, and usually is not bothered by the things he does. Usually. Despite his anger, Ray is a doting father and tries his best to push good moral lessons onto his daughter Brittany. And while he's mostly successful when she's younger, as she grows older, she grows more suspicious of him, while at the same time becoming more argumentative and rude. Basically a normal teenager. But the best part about this is, when Ray and her argue, he realizes how much she is like him. For example, after Brittany finds Ray's gun under his bed and takes it and starts to play with it and ends up shooting it, Ray comes home from work and immediately confronts her about why she fired the gun. She argues with him and basically says, if you didn't have the gun, I wouldn't have shot it. Which stumps Ray for about a second. And it made me laugh because not only is that such a teenager argument, but Ray can totally see himself in her. It's moments like this that make this show so excellent. But really everything about the show is excellent, including the side characters. Oh yes, I'm going to mention Gary. Now, Gary is Ray's best bro, and honestly the kind of friend you need in life. Despite crisis and danger, Gary sticks with Ray through it all, thick and thin, and helps out during some jobs that require 2 people. Of course, in order to be an interesting character, Gary needs some more characteristics than just being a good friend. So, well, Gary's addicted to adult content, and it gets so bad that he orders Lord forgive me for saying this word, he orders a fussy. I'm not going to specify what that is, you can just guess. That's not even to mention his pee-pee tapes, which Ray takes the fall for, because he's a good bro like that. But eventually Gary does turn his addiction to a more useful outlet, and becomes an entrepreneur, and creates his own content. Moving on, we have Freddy. Freddy is Ray's sort of boss. He gives him jobs, and sometimes will ask him for favors. Usually he stays out of his way, though. But of course, this is Mr. Inbetween, so Freddy has to have a fatal flaw. His flaw is his gambling addiction, and it gets him into trouble. Sometimes he gets beat up for it. There's also Allie, who is Ray's girlfriend, and Bill Shoesmith, who is Ray's father. There's also many other characters who are also equally excellent. So far, we have an interesting main character that is played perfectly by Scott Ryan, and side characters that are casted well. Now that we have our characters, we need the stage and the plot. Our stage, of course, is Australia, home to Steve Irwin and Dimmies. And thanks to this show, I now know what a Dimmy is. And if I ever visit the land down under, I will be trying one. The story of Mr. Inbetween is more akin to a slice of life than anything else. There are definitely plot points that continue throughout most of the show, but a lot of the show is also just Ray's life. In fact, there are a good chunk of episodes in Season 2 that are just his non-criminal life and show Ray doing pretty normal things, about as normal as a hitman can be, such as hanging out with Gary or his daughter, but then he takes on a more dangerous job, and that's a good part. Now, one thing that I haven't yet mentioned is that Ray's life kinda sucks. I mean, so much of it just goes wrong. I don't want to spoil too much yet, but a lot of people die, and Ray's relationships become strained. Another thing is that this show is just brutal. One scene that really sticks out to me is when Ray has a short prison stunt after assaulting someone, and he gets an easy 10k job while in the joint. All he has to do, hurt this guy, because he's been causing some problems. So what does he do? Does he beat him up? No. Does he break a finger or two? No. Instead, he puts jam in boiling water and creates what I now know as prison napalm. I guess by the name alone, one can guess what it's going to do to the poor man on the receiving end. Ray, in his usual fashion, saunters up to the man in his cell and throws it all over him. It's pretty brutal, but it helps show that despite Ray's affection towards his daughter and his friends, this man is a killer, and he has no problem maiming or murdering people. It's a dark show, and it's also just straight up depressing sometimes. In another episode, Ray has to help these two novice killers hide their hit, and he goes over to retrieve the body. He not only finds out that these two novice killers are junkies, but they have hidden the body in their garage. Yeah, as I said, these were novices. Eventually, after discussion with Freddy, the terms come out to be that Ray will have to dispose of the corpse and the two junkies. So Ray gets them to come out to the Outback with him, and on the way there, he strikes up a conversation with one of them. They get to talking about their family, and from that, to their daughters. He talks about how, of course, since he's on drugs, he can't see her, but he wants to get clean for her. I feel like in other shows, this would have caused our main character to want to save him, and maybe, just maybe, Ray would have had mercy on him, but I doubt it. It's not really in his character to save people, but maybe he would have spared him. But of course, things had to go horribly wrong. But maybe he would have spared him, if not for the man in the back who decided to smoke meth and get jumpy with a gun. With the gun to his head, Ray decides the easiest course of action is to intentionally crash the car. The one in the back flies out the windshield, while the father dies in the front. Ray gets out of the car and lights it up before walking away. The show is dark. I've attempted to keep the spoilers to a minimum, but for the next two sections I'm going to spoil the entirety of 2 episodes. One of them is a pretty major spoiler for the entire show, so click off now if you care. Now that I've warned you, let's talk about 2 really good episodes that showcase Mr. Inbetween at its best. Socks Are Important is the 9th episode of the 2nd season. Season 2 is dark, and this episode is one of the darkest. One of Ray's best friends commits suicide after becoming a marked man due to stealing money from Ray's kind of boss. I mean, Ray is technically a freelancer, but Freddy's the guy who always gives him job offers. Thing is, Dirk, the man who committed suicide, had a young daughter named Maddie, who is friends with Ray's daughter. Ray feels quite guilty over the matter, and it's one of the few times where you can really tell that he doesn't enjoy this life, and probably feels pretty trapped by it. So in an attempt to lessen the guilt, he takes Maddie and Britt to the store, and tells her to get something for her birthday. He and Britt walk down an aisle, leaving Maddie by herself. You might be able to tell where this is going. Yeah, she gets kidnapped. Well, I think you can also guess what she's being sold for. Ray frantically searches the store for her, and later they see a man who took her on the security cameras. Things start to get tense as Ray speeds off and dumps Brittany onto her mom. Afterwards, he calls Gary and tells him to start searching for the missing girl. As each second passes and Ray gets more desperate, things just keep getting more tense. Now, I was pretty sure they wouldn't kill the girl, even though the show is very dark. I almost wouldn't put it past them, but thankfully she ends up being okay, as a girl can be after being kidnapped. Despite this though, the episode is always tense. Gary, with his many contacts, ends up finding a guy who bought weed off a man that bears a striking resemblance to the man on the security camera. From there, it's a trip to the man's house, in which Gary pretends to buy weed from him, then pulls out the gun, and asks the simple question, what is in the locked basement? Well, we soon find out, in the locked basement, there's a cabinet with a false wall. Inside that is Maddie. Safe, and as sound as you can be after an experience like this. Once Maddie's recovered, we get a heartwarming reunion between the mom, before we switch back to Ray. He enters the apartment, goes into the basement, goes over to the false cabinet, and opens it to find the 3 individuals involved in the holding of Maddie. He enters with a shovel, and I think you can guess what happens to them. This is an excellent episode and best shows the concept that a lot of episodes in the show follow, which is, at first, it's a semi-normal, as normal as Ray's life can be, slice of life before taking on a darker turn as it switches to Ray's second life in the dark, seedy world of Australian crime. I just want to say, most episodes follow this concept, but some are just completely slice of life, and some are almost all action. But usually, it's slice of life, then it switches over. I'm giving another spoiler warning before I talk about this episode because it has a major spoiler for a certain character. Ray Shoesmith has a brother named Bruce, and Bruce suffers from some sort of motor neuron disease, and it makes his life a living hell. There are several moments throughout the series that really show you how terrible it is. There's a part where Bruce shits himself, and it's not even funny at all. Instead, it's incredibly depressing as you watch him suffer more and more. I cannot think of another show out there that could take something like shitting your pants and make it one of the most depressing things I have ever seen. On a lighter note, despite his disease, Bruce enjoys spending time with Ray's daughter. In fact, many of the happier moments of the show revolve around Bruce and Brittany, enjoying time together. But of course, nothing in the show can be happy and last very long. There are several points throughout the show that hint towards the fate of Bruce. I think most people realize very early on that Bruce is not a character who's going to survive to the end of the show. There's even a scene where Bruce straight up says when things get too bad, he wants to end this. So in Season 2, Episode 11, Bruce says it's time. Bruce and Brittany spend one last day together, and after Brittany is about to leave for her mom's, Bruce begins to tear up, which puzzles Brittany, and she even says something to the effect of, "Don't worry, you'll see me next week. Why are you crying?" So Bruce and Ray go to their childhood home, and they reminisce on the past. Bruce tries to make Ray feel better by saying that no one really dies, and we all just return to matter. This fails to make Ray feel any better, but after this, it's time for the end. As Ray prepares to inject the syringe, Bruce tells him to get closer to their father, his last wish. Ray says he will try, and Bruce dies. In a powerful moment, Ray burns down their childhood home with Bruce in it, and sheds a single tear. These 2 episodes are great, but I would like to say that every episode in this show is excellent, and you need to watch the entire show. Remember, it's only 3 seasons. Last thing, this is being written after I watched the finale of the show, and I just wanted to say I really liked it. The comparison that I feel everyone is going to compare it to is probably The Sopranos. I just mean that in the sense that it just kind of ends. It really isn't a full wrap-up of things like one might expect from another show. And I wish that certain plot points hadn't been left so open-ended, but honestly I really liked it. A great ending to a fantastic show, and now that it's over, I hope it gains a strong cult following over the next few years.